Jai Shri Giriraj Govardhan Ki Jai. Jai Shri Nitai Gauranga Ki Jai. Jai Shri Nrsimha Bhagavan Ki Jai. Jai Srila Prabhupada. A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jai Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayana Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj Ki Jai. Jai Shri Rupanuga Guru Varga Ki Jai. Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Samagata Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanandi. Vandeham Shri Guru Shijataha Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathan Vitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadhutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Om Jnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam karoti vachalam pangam langayate girim Yat kripa tamam bande Shri Gurun dinataranam Vancha kalpatarubhyascha Kripa sindhubhya evacha Patitanam pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo namo namaha Namo Mahabhadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namane Gaura Tishe Nama He Krishna Karuna Sindho Dinabandho Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Jayatam Shuruto Pangor Mama Mandamatergati Matsarva Svapadam Bojo Radha Madana Mohano Divyat Vrindaranya Kalpadrumadha Shrimad Ratnagar Sinhasanasto Shrimad Radha Srila Govinda Devo Prestadibhi Sevyamano Smarami Shriman Rasarasadambhi Vamshivata Tatakstitaha Karshana Venusvanayar Gopir Gopinata Shriyestunaha Bhaktya Vihina Aparadha Lakshay Kshiptascha Kamadi Taranga Madhye Kripa Maitvam Sharanam Prapanna Brinde Namaste Charanarvindam Brindai Tulsi Dimbai Priyai Keshavasya Cha Krishna Bhakti Prade Devi Satyavachai Namo Namaha Panchatattvatmakam Krishnam Bhakta Rupa Swarupakam Bhaktavataram Bhaktakyam Namami Bhakta Shaktikam Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda, Shri Advaita Gadadhar, Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. First of all, I'm offering my unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most beloved Gurudev Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Ashto Tarashata Sri Srila A.C. Bhakti Vedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. And then I'm offering my same unlimited Dandavat Pranams and my Shraddha Pushpanjali at the lotus feet of my most worshipful beloved Siksha Gurudevs Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Goswami Maharaj and Nitya Lila Pravishta Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Asto Tarasata Sri Srila Bhakti Vedanta Narayan Goswami Maharaj. And my Dandavat pranams to the lotus feet of all of my Sri Sri Rupanuga Guru Varga, and my Dandavat pranams to all the Vaishnavas and all the Vaishnavas. So we're continuing with the reading of Srila Sachidananda Bhakti Vinod Thakur on his commentary on the 2 verses of Sri Upadeshamrita, verses number 2 and 3, which are telling the 6 favorable and the 6 unfavorable activities for bhakti. And he has written an entire chapter essay for each one of the items. There are 12 items. And now we're finishing the description, which was quite lengthy, of what is called tat karma pravartanat, meaning that to perform all the activities that are favorable for bhakti. And in that category, Srila Rupa Goswami has said, tat karma pravartanat, to do all activities favorable for bhakti. So what are those activities? Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur has vividly explained the 64 limbs of bhakti, which are based upon what Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu taught to Srila Sanatana Goswami and Srila Rupa Goswami, and which Srila Rupa Goswami has listed in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and which came to the Western world as the book, The Nectar of Devotion, written by our Prabhupada, Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, which is a summary study of the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So we're at the very, very end. We didn't have enough time to finish the last section yesterday before the Artik came. So now we're finishing the last 3 paragraphs and the last section of this description of the 64 limbs of bhakti. So Srila Bhakti Vinod Thakur is now mentioning Raga Nuga Bhakti and activities favorable to bhakti, which is called Tat Karma Pravartana. In this way, Vaidhi Bhakti has an important place in sadhana bhakti. Besides this, the practice of Raga Nuga Bhakti is very powerful in the process of sadhana. the part of sadhana that arises through a disposition, the part of sadhana that arises through a disposition for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis, and that aims for acquiring their innate propensity for Krishna Seva, is known as Rag Anuga Bhakti. We will describe this further. So, in our Sangha, the word Rag Anuga Bhakti is very well known. And the term Rupanuga Bhakti also, but even more well known is Raganuga Bhakti. But if I were to ask most devotees in our Sangha, can you please explain to me what is Rag Anuga Bhakti? What is the meaning of that word Rag Anuga? And what are the qualifications for practicing Rag Anuga Bhakti? How does Rag Anuga, the term Rag Anuga, relate with Rag Marg Bhakti? There are many, many things that need to be understood. Also, how does this Rag Anuga Bhakti fit in with the term Sadhana Bhakti? Because there are three types of bhakti, very clearly explained by Srila Rupa Goswami. There are three different stages of bhakti. Do you know what they are?
Three different stages of bhakti?
Three different stages of bhakti.
Is it Vaidhi Bhakti? Is that what you mean?
Kind of, but I'm quizzing to you. If you know, what are the three stages of bhakti?
Sadhana Bhakti.
Yes.
Bhava Bhakti.
Yes. Yes. Very good. Very good. And there's a whole discussion in our Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Bindu, written by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur. There's a whole discussion there about why there are three divisions and not two. Because we could say, well, there's sadhana bhakti and there's prem bhakti. Because technically speaking, bhava bhakti is the beginning of prem bhakti. But yet there's very important reasons why there has to be three clear divisions. I was rereading that a couple of days ago. So, I'm not going to go into that right now because Bhaktivinoda Thakur is introducing the subject matter of Raganuga Bhakti, and he's also saying, he's giving a little description here in these last few sentences. He's giving a little description what it is. What is this Raganuga? This is practically one of the most important things to know for aspiring sadhakas. And that is one of the main topics that our Gurudev introduced when he came to the West. He wanted to clarify this. How to enter Rag Marg, the pathway of Rag. What are the qualifications for the devotee to enter and to begin to practice bhakti in the line of Rag Anuga, you see? And there's an entire book written by Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur called Rag Vartma Chandrika, which our Gurudev presented in English. Rag Vartma Chandrika means the moonlit path of Rag Marg, Raganuga. There is discussed very clearly. Also in Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu and in the review of that. I call it a book review, what Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has written, called the Sindhu Bindu. You know that book? The Sindhu Bindu? Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu Bindu.
A drop.
It is a drop of what? Of the great work of Srila Rupa Goswami, Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Gurudev has given us that, very, very beautifully presented, to make it very clear what is sadhana bhakti, what is Vaidhi bhakti, what is Raganuga bhakti, what are all the different stages leading up to bhav and prem. All of these things are given. This is our most important document on the science of bhakti and bhakti rasa. Bhakti rasa. Because ultimately bhakti means bhakti rasa. But in the stages of sadhana, one is not qualified yet to experience bhakti rasa. Only in the stages of bhav, then there is some ability to enter into bhakti rasa. That's all explained scientifically, how coming from the stages of nishta, ruchi, asakti, and bhav, this ability of the devotee, by dint of his deep, deep attachment and longing and his taste that has developed, and in the stage of asakti, now his eternal Siddha Swarup, spiritual form, begins to come to him internally in the form of spurti, momentary glimpse of his actual spiritual identity. So bhakti rasa cannot be experienced or tasted by anyone unless they have understood their sthai bhav. What is sthai bhav? What is sthai bhav?
Fixed position.
Of what?
Of bhakti bhav.
No. Sthai bhav. There are 5 elements explained by Rupa Goswami. 5 elements of bhakti rasa. Bhakti rasa cannot be experienced unless these 5 elements are there. Vibhav, Anubhav, Satvik Bhav, Vyadichari Bhav, and sthai bhav. So I'm just giving little. I'm not going to go into this topic because we'll read about that in due course. But what a sthai bhav means, your permanent, eternal relationship with Krishna. That is called your sthai bhav. The word sthai means fixed, but fixed what? That now your sthai bhav, your eternal relationship with Krishna has begun to manifest. Shri Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shri Shri Radha Hari Radha Govinda Ji Ki Jai. So here Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's saying Raganuga Bhakti and activities favorable to Bhakti. Tat tat karma pravartana. In this way, Vaidhi Bhakti has an important place in sadhana bhakti, because everything that has been talked about thus far is in the category of Vaidhi Bhakti. What does Vaidhi mean?
Conocimiento.
Knowledge?
No, not knowledge.
It's like
Vaidhi.
the practices, the primary practices of bhakti?
No, the word Vaidhi, you know?
Rules.
Yes, it comes from the word Vidhi. Vidhi means rules and regulations. So Vaidhi sadhana is sadhana that is impelled by the rules and the regulations that are given in the Shastras. And there is a particular type of shraddha which the sadhak has, because from the very beginning of practicing bhakti, everyone has some shraddha. Otherwise you can't enter bhakti at all. Ado shraddha. That's the beginning of all the stages of bhakti, and it's there throughout, and it's growing and developing gradually into prema. That is Shraddha. So there's two different types of Shraddha. One type of Shraddha enables a person to practice Vaidhi Bhakti because they have faith in Shastra Praman. They have faith in the evidence which is given in the Shastras. So that type of Shraddha also has some element of fear in it, naturally. Because when there's rules and regulations, there's also some reaction if one doesn't follow the rules and the regulations, you see. Just like laws. There are laws of nature, there are laws of human society and so forth. And if one doesn't follow that, they get punished for not following the rules. Similarly, in the Shastras, it's very clearly told that if somebody does such and such and they don't follow properly, they'll be punished by the laws of nature. Okay? So in Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, it is impelled by some little element of fear, that there is a greater power, and if I transgress the rules that are given, there is a punishment for that, which there is. So that impetus to perform bhakti according to the rules and regulations and so forth is the basis of a beginning sadhaka being able to practice bhakti. And we see that the introduction of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's movement all over the world and attracting many, many jivas who have some shraddha, who have some faith, this has made it possible for them to begin to practice the activities of bhakti, the 64 limbs of bhakti in their life. This has made it possible for them because they have shraddha. And the way that Mahaprabhu has introduced, he has made it relatively simple. But like we were reading yesterday, the 5 main activities of bhakti are what? Sadhu Sangha, Nam Kirtan, Bhagavat Shravan, Mathuravasa, Srimurtir, Shraddhaya Sevam. Shraddhaya Sevam means serving the deity form of the Lord with faith, Shraddha. If that's not there, you cannot engage in bhakti. So, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying in this way, Vaidhi Bhakti has an important place in sadhana bhakti. And actually, there is no other alternative. It is not possible for someone to practice Raga Nuga Bhakti without the necessary qualifications. And this is the problem of Sahajiyism, Prakriti Sahajiyism, that they have no real qualifications at all for practicing. Gurudev has talked about this so many times. They barely even know how to wash themselves after passing stool. I mean, he says like that, Gurudev. And yet these people claim to be, having an intimate relationship with Radha and Krishna. So this is bogus and this is punishable. Also, they'll have to suffer for this. So therefore, the proper pathway is for devotees to be introduced to the philosophy through hearing Sri Krishna's words of Bhagavad Gita, and to the pathway of Sharanagati and surrender, and following the 64 limbs of bhakti, which begins with Guru Pada Ashraya, taking shelter of Sri Guru, following instructions, and so forth. This is all part of Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. So, Raganuga Bhakti, that, he says, will be described, we will describe this further. Now, Bhaktivinoda Thakur is saying, this Vaidhi Bhakti has an important place in sadhana bhakti. Besides this Vaidhi Bhakti, the practice of Raganuga Bhakti is very powerful in the process of sadhana. The part of sadhana, this is part of sadhana, that arises through a disposition for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis, and that aims for acquiring their innate propensity for Krishna Seva, is known as Rag Anuga Bhakti. We will describe this further. So, here he's making two very important points. He's saying that this very powerful type of sadhana bhakti, very powerful, which is called Raganuga Bhakti, it is part of the process of sadhana bhakti. Some people confuse and they don't understand. They think that this is bhav bhakti, spontaneous devotional service, because that term is used by Prabhupada. But in actuality, it's still in the category of sadhana. Sadhana means that a person is aspiring to attain spiritual perfection, right? And he's a sadhak, right? So there's the endeavor is going on to practice the limbs of bhakti so that one can attain spiritual perfection. And what is that spiritual perfection? It means to realize your eternal spiritual form, to arouse your eternal relationship with Krishna. So here he's saying, he's describing that this part of sadhana that arises through a disposition for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis, it is known as Raganuga Bhakti. What does that mean? Disposition for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis. This is the important part. There is a particular type of faith. It's called Bhagavat Madhurya Lila Shraddha. This term is there in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. That means that the sweet pastimes of Bhagavan that are so captivating and attractive to the heart, when a particular type of Shraddha arises in the sadhak, which is born from attraction to those pastimes, to the Brijvasis who are engaging in those pastimes with Krishna, that very Shraddha becomes the basis of being able to enter Raganuga Bhakti. Without that Shraddha, one has to continue in Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Have you understood? Hey, Sansagati, did you understand what I'm telling? What Bhaktivinoda Thakur is telling about Raganuga Bhakti? And the Shraddha that is necessary to practice it?
So you're saying like this Shraddha that awakens when we hear the pastimes of the Brajvasis?
Yes, by hearing the pastimes of Krishna. Then, and hearing from a Rasik Vaishnava who is immersed in the sweetness of their pastimes. He is qualified because Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Rupa Goswami is told that Srimad Bhagavatartanam asvado rasikai saha. Rasikai saha means in the company of a Rasika Vaishnava. Rasikai saha. Saha means with. So Srimad Bhagavatartanam, that means to hear the artha of Srimad Bhagavatam in the association of a Rasik Vaishnava. From that, it is possible that some ruchi, some attraction to those pastimes and having this aspiration develop in the heart that I also want to serve Krishna as the Brijvasis are serving Krishna with their loving moods. So again, I'm reading the words, the way that Bhaktivinoda Thakur is explaining this. He says, the part of sadhana that arises through a disposition, a tendency for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis. And here's the second part. First is the disposition for following in the footsteps of the Brajavasis, and the second part is that aims for acquiring their innate propensity for Krishna Seva. That is known as Raganuga Bhakti. So is this clear?
Yeah.
Yes. This is something that most devotees are not clear on.
Yeah.
Even older devotees, they're not clear on this. But it's very essential to understand that unless someone becomes qualified to practice Raganuga Bhakti, they will not be able to attain this ultimate goal which Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come to give. You understand this point? What did I just say? Unless what?
Unless, listen, I lost it. I had it there.
Yeah.
Unless one is clear to follow the path of Raganuga Bhakti, they will not.
What? They'll not be able to what?
They will not be able to develop that bhakti, that following, that taste.
No. Let me make it more clear. Only Raganuga Bhakti. Through that, you can attain Goloka Vrindavan and the eternal association of Radha and Krishna and serve them there. It cannot be attained through Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. Is that clear?
Yeah.
Only Raganuga Bhakti. This is explained in the very beginning chapters of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita very clearly by Sri Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami. So, the whole purpose of Mahaprabhu's descent is to give what? Unnata Ujjvala Rasa Swabhakti Shriyam. The beauty of Srimati Radhika's moods and praying in the form of what? Palyadasi Bhav. Manjari Bhav. This is the ultimate gift Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has come to give to the jivas. Cannot be attained through Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti. I'm spending a little time on this point because this is very important, and I began to understand this many years before, clearly, through my association with Srila Bhakti Rakshak Sridhar Maharaj and then with Srila Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. And this was the point that Gurudev was trying to introduce to the whole world of Vaishnavas, is that you will have to come to this. How will you come to this? By hearing, and by associating, and by serving those Vaishnavas who have those moods. Otherwise, this faith, this necessary Shraddha that we've described, two types of Shraddha, this Shraddha for being attracted to the pastimes of Krishna, the sweet pastimes of Krishna, that will not arise in the heart unless one has had the association of Rasika Vaishnavas in this life or previous lives, or a combination of both. I am saying this based upon Rag Vartma Chandrika. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur clearly explains that. So what was Srila Prabhupada's mission to come to the West? We were talking about that, was it yesterday or the day before? To give these things ultimately, right? But you can't directly give Raganuga Bhakti. That cannot be directly given. Therefore, Srila Prabhupada, in the limited time that he had, he gave the books, he gave the lectures, he gave the foundation, everything he gave. But the maturity of the devotee will have to be the main factor eventually. Whether that devotee has actually developed that internal attraction, genuine faith. And it's extremely rare. It's not, you will not find it broadly in the Vaishnava community because it's a higher qualification. Now, I want to say something about this qualification. Srila Gurudev gave a couple of examples very clearly about greed. Because ultimately it boils down to lobha, greed. You cannot enter Rag Marg Bhakti without some greed. Bhaktivinoda Thakur will eventually explain this further, but this is the main factor. There's a verse given in Ramananda Roy Samvad when Mahaprabhu is inquiring from Ramananda Roy, and finally Ramananda Roy comes to a particular verse, and he's describing in that verse the tendency to relish Krishna Bhakti Rasa. There's a verse. It's very well known. Prabhupada also quoted it. Not too often, but he always quoted it. And the name International Society for Krishna Consciousness came from this verse. Prabhupada has admitted that fact. You know that verse? Say? Right. So he said it correctly, although no one could hear it on Facebook because he was not saying it into the microphone. But this is the verse. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati Kriyatam Api Kutopi Labhyate Tatra Lolyam Api Mulyam Ekalam Janmakoti Sukritayar Na Labhyate. Let me explain this. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati. That line means Krishna consciousness. What is Krishna consciousness? The term Krishna consciousness movement, ISKCON, all of this. What is it? It's taken from this line. Prabhupada himself told that. I have taken the term Krishna consciousness from this line. Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati. So we have to examine each word in this line. How does that end up becoming the term Krishna consciousness? Because ultimately what is Krishna consciousness is the mati, the intelligence, and bhavita mati, the tendency to taste Krishna Bhakti Rasa, to experience Krishna Bhakti Rasa, bhavita mati. Now, in that verse, Ramananda Roy is saying, Kriyatam api kutopi labhyate. He says, wherever this is available, you should immediately purchase it, like in the marketplace. Where this is available, Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavitamati, you should immediately purchase it. Then he tells, what is the price that you'll have to pay to purchase this? He says, Tatra lolyam, this lolyam, this greed, apimulyam ekalam, there is only one price that can be paid for that, and that is lolyam. This is the only price. Tatra lolyam apimulyam ekalam. To get this Krishna Bhakti Rasa Bhavita Mati, the only price is lolyam, which means greed. And then he further substantiates this by saying, Janmakoti Sukritayar Nalabhyate. He says it cannot be attained even by Koti Janma. That means millions of lives. Of what? Of Sukriti. We know what Sukriti is. So even millions of lives of Sukriti cannot enable somebody to attain Krishna Bhakti Rasa. There is only one, lolyam. So this is the topic. When discussing Rag, Marg Bhakti, Raganuga Bhakti, all of these descriptions by Rupa Goswami, we have to understand this one point, that only by greed then one becomes qualified. But it does not mean that he has attained perfection. It means that he's still in the stage of sadhana. He's in the stage of practicing. But now he's practicing with a completely different mood. And you know what his practice consists of? The same activities. The same hearing, chanting, worshipping the deities, everything, as there is in Vaidhi Bhakti. That does not change. Rupa Goswami has written a separate verse to explain this. There are some modifications of it, and the mood in which one is practicing is quite different. But that's why he says this is very powerful. Raganuga Bhakti is very powerful in the process of sadhana, he's saying here, because the power of that can very quickly bring you to bhav. But sadhana bhakti, not so. So now, this point I want to expand on a little bit, that it is powerful because Raganuga Bhakti is practiced with greed. Now, how to get that greed? Srila Gurudev spoke about this. And he also told that ruchi is the beginning. Ruchi. Ruchi is the stage after what? Nishta. After Nishta, then comes ruchi. Actually, ruchi is a further development of Nishta, firm faith. But then in that stage of ruchi, then there can be a great attraction for the sweetness of Krishna's pastimes. And great taste, because ruchi means taste. So there will be a taste and attraction for doing the activities of bhakti with moods, with mood. So that taste and that attraction, Srila Gurudev is saying that sometimes in the association of very exalted pure Vaishnavas, ruchi can touch, he uses the word touch, even in lower stages of bhakti. It can touch, even in the stage of anartha nivritti, because the devotees are performing all the activities and the limbs of bhakti and associating with pure sadhus, following Guru, doing all of this. And sometimes by the powerful association of the Rasik Vaishnavas, ruchi can even touch there. It doesn't mean that that person will immediately have greed, but some reflection, some semblance of that will start, you see. So Gurudev gave two examples. One example of a poor man walking on the road in an Indian town where there's a sweet shop, and the sweet shop window, glass window, is got the display in the window of all the different sweets. We've all been to India, and we all know that that's how they sell them, because everybody sees them, and what happens? They become desirous. So there's a man who's walking along that road, but he's poor. He's very poor. He doesn't have any paisa in his pocket. But he sees those sweets in the window. And what begins to happen automatically? His mouth begins to water. His mouth waters. Right? Because you can't stop that. That's the natural effect. Right? So, if someone sees this poor man standing there with his mouth watering and looking at the sweets, and he says to him, keep going, you don't have any money, you can't have this. Actually, that man has no right to tell him that. Because greed, in this case, his greed to have those sweets, this is coming naturally. This is not coming by rules and regulations. You can't give any rule to this poor man that his mouth cannot water when he sees the sweets. You see? Okay, so that's one example Gurudev gave of greed. that this greed, this lolium, it can come in these stages and gradually develop. And then ruchi will come, actual ruchi. Gurudev used to say, I'm simply praying that all of you can attain ruchi in this life. And then he would say, and if not, then at least nishta, at least nishta. Because if ruchi is attained in this life, your next life is attaining bhav. There is no doubt about it. Attaining the stage of bhav, the stage of perfection, and so forth. Second example, the former princess in England who was known all over the world. Who is that? Princess Diana. So Gurudev gave the example that when Princess Di is riding in the marriage, royal chariot, and all the citizens are lining the road to the Buckingham Palace, and their wedding taking place, right? So, that was a big event, right? So, Prince Charles and Princess Di, they're riding in the chariot, and again, there's an ordinary man on the side of the road, and he sees Princess Di. He thinks, how beautiful Princess Di. I wish that she could be my wife. Right? So, this is absurd, is it not? That he's going to be your wife, But Gurudev is giving that as an example of greed. You see? That it's not bound by rules and regulations. So this is the important factor that has to be understood. What is Raganuga Bhakti? Why is Raganuga Bhakti the only method, the only type of bhakti that the devotee can attain Krishna in Goloka Vrindavan? Through Vaidhi Sadhana Bhakti, through Vaidhi Bhakti, you can attain Krishna in Vaikuntha. You can attain Vaikuntha. Even to some extent Dwarka in the spiritual world. But no one can attain Goloka Braj without what? Following in the footsteps of the eternal associates of the Lord and having their moods arise within one's heart, aspiring to serve in that way. Krishna smaran janam chasya preshtam nija samihitam tat katha rato chasya kuryad vasam vraje sada. This is one of the verses that Srila Rupa Goswami has written. There's 3 verses that he wrote describing the method of Rag Marg Bhakti. So here he says, Krishna smaran janam chasya preshtam. So Krishna smaram janam chasya preshtam means the most dear associates of Krishna. Krishna janam means his own jan. Krishna's own eternal associates. Krishna janam smaran, remembering them. Chasya preshta nija samihitam. And their own moods in serving Krishna. Tat katha ratas chaso. One should hear. Tat katha means one should hear the katha about Krishna's relationship with his eternal associates and always remember them. Kuryad vasam vraje sada. And always reside in Braja. Kuryad vasa vraje sada. Always residing in Braja. And that's where the residing in Braja is also explained that at least internally, if one cannot physically. So, in this way, Rag Marg Bhakti, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he's now introducing this topic. And he says, persons who endeavor for bhakti are to follow all these activities with their body, mind, and speech, what has been told in this chapter. Krishna, persons who endeavor for bhakti, they should follow all these activities with their body, their mind, and their speech. then according to a sadhaka's qualification, he must arduously engage in the limbs of either Vaidhi sadhana bhakti or Raganuga sadhana bhakti. Some attain the topmost fruit of bhav by performing sadhana of only one limb of bhakti even, and others attain it by performing sadhana of several limbs. That means bhav. They're attaining bhav even by performing one limb properly. So the bhakti of those, I'm finishing now, the bhakti of those who take shelter of the holy name and serving the Vaishnavas is known as aikantiki, one-pointed. I'm reading that sentence again. The bhakti of those who take shelter of the holy name and serving the Vaishnavas is known as aikantiki, one-pointed bhakti. Such persons have no taste for other types of sadhana. Therefore, sadhakas must become one-pointedly surrendered and engage in bhakti sadhana with enthusiasm, utsaha, firm determination, nishchayata, and patience, dhairya. That's the completion of this chapter. And tomorrow we will go to the 11th item, or the 5th item of the activities that are favorable for bhakti, which is Sangatyagat. Sangatyagat means to give up all materialistic association. And after we complete that chapter, will come the last of these 12 items, 12 limbs, and the last of the 6 limbs that are favorable, which is Sato Vritte, following in the footsteps of all the previous sadhus and pure devotees. Then we will have completed the book of Bhaktivinoda Thakur. It'll take a few more days to do that because some of these chapters are a bit longer and quite detailed. So we're finishing here. Gaur Premanande Hari Hari Bo. Jai Shri Upadeshamritam Ki Jai. Jai Srila Rupa Goswami Pada Ki Jai. Jai Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur Ki Jai. Nitai Gaur Premanande.